So I think, Madam, recording has started. Uh,
Yes, yes.
so
We can start.
good evening, all of you, and I welcome to Professor Swarnamoy Tripathi, and I'm thankful to her since she has agreed to speak to us on the theme historical materialism as a method of research, right? Any discussion on historical materialism must begin with dialectics. And Karl Marx, used both, uh, used dialectics both as a theory and a method to understand how world works. In dialectical thought, society is comprised of internal, relation. Social entities do not and cannot exist apart from underlying relation they are involved in. And dialectical social relations actually define what any entity will be. One of the central facets of dialectics is the unity of opposite. Dialectical relation unites opposites. For example, husband-wife, master-slave, then capitalist and worker or laborer. Then dialectical social relations always, contain conflict and contradiction within them. It is the play of contradiction within the relation that drive change, and social relation both constrain and enable the change. Dialectical research emphasizes social totality, and there is nothing such as economy or ideology that exists independently of social totality. The unity of opposite and the emphasis on social totality within Marxism imply that the mental and material are part of the same web of social relationship. To fully understand a given society, it is necessary to place various social relationships within its historical and material context. Historical materialist archaeology begins with the human population that is active, historically situated, and whose activity is fundamentally associated with production. A historical materialist method focuses attention on production and reproduction of everyday life. People should produce things to live and reproduce themselves, and social relations they enter into an order. Humans make society through playing out the contradiction, constraints, and freedom in a dialectical social relations that form everyday life. A dialectical archaeology is based on the contradiction and relation that exist between patterns of different material form. It is the anomalies between the various kind of artifacts that are used in different contexts that become the key to interpret the internal dynamics of this society. What distinguishes historical materialism from the other social science is actually the praxis. Praxis involves the dialectical interrelationship of critique, knowledge, and action. Critique reveals oppression. Knowledge helps to understand the oppressive structure, and action provides the basis to take action. And all these three is required to transform the society. Now, Marxist archaeologists must ask scholarship for whom, whether their scholarship strengthen or reinforce the power relations of the social world or not. I will not go further. Now I am inviting our speaker to give us more clarity on this theme, how the historical materialism can be used as a research method while interpreting and analyzing our data. Now, over to you, madam. You may continue, please. And now, madam, you may please continue.
Thank you very much, Himanshu Babu. Dear Himanshu Babu and dear students and esteemed participants, it's indeed a pleasure to share my stray thoughts with you. When I read political science in Jawaharlal Nehru, when I was studying political science in Jawaharlal Nehru University, I must start my deliberation by expressing my gratitude to my teacher who was teaching us Hegel and Marx. Right now, he is writing on Indian politics, Professor Rajiv Bhargav. The way he taught us actually created interest in me to love reading Marx and to enjoy reading Marx. Whenever I found any writing, I felt like reading it, and in due course of time, I have developed a strong feeling that the historical materialism of Karl Marx is just not an interpretation, a materialistic interpretation of history. Rather, it is a research methodology which we can use to understand history. Of course, gradually, this approach developed as a social science methodology or approach as political economy approach, where we try to interpret political institutions, political phenomena in terms of economy. All the while, we thought the decisions made in the political system has something behind the screen, and that is the economic factor which actually propels or motivates a decision in the political realm. Now let us, in a very, very simpler way, let us discuss how we look at historical materialism as a sociological theory. Now, I strongly believe that historical materialism is a tool to study social change, and it is a tool to study society. It is in fact a perspective. Sociologists also agree that. They name it as conflict theory to study society. Now, unless and until we discuss about how was the society in which Marx lived, it would be difficult to understand his perspective. Now, you know the 19th century in which Karl Marx lived, grew up, and shaped his writings. Now, he wrote for 40 odd years and produced many historical writings. That 19th century is a time which is defined by radical inequality and rapid economic and political change. Why do I say radical inequality? Today in our society, we are also having inequality. But in 19th century, the inequality was, at its peak. There were no labor laws. Majority were suffering in the hands of the minority. Wealth was concentrated in few hands, and the wealthy ones in society never felt ashamed of exploiting the workers and the peasants. This was the period when the uh, the rulers or the national governments, they exploited their workers. At the same time, they exploited the workers and the peasants in the colonies, where they were ruling as imperialist powers. This was the 19th century Europe in which Marx lived. If we discuss about the life of Marx, we will find that after he completed his studies in Bonn and Berlin University, his higher education, where he came in contact with the young Hegelians, there he developed his thought, and after he completed his studies, he started writing, no, produced radical writings for radical newspapers having radical viewpoints. That is how his journalistic skills developed, and that produced such writings that he was questioned by the state, and he had to leave Germany. He fled to France, then he fled to London, the United Kingdom, with his family, and finally we know even today British National Museum has a historic place where Marx sat and wrote his political and economic writings. This is also the era, by that time, uh, already in social theory, the, the methods of rationalism and empiricism had already been in discourse. Rene Descartes, who is considered as the father of rationalism, he was talking about uh, a social theory where we need to exercise our reason, and he said that I uh, I think everything can be known through deduction, because man is having a faculty that is reason. In contradiction to that ideology, another, you can say that methodology, another methodology which was also had emerged, that is empiricism, where we say that all our knowledge comes through actual experience or sense data. So it is, we can assume that Karl Marx, being a very, very interested student in social science, must have read all these things and must have uh, interpreted critically all these methodologies. So what you find in Karl Marx methodology is not pure empiricism. So we can say that Marx was not an empiricist. He drew a distinction between essence and appearance, and an empiricist is always carried away by the appearance, means what we see through our senses. Because as Himanshu Sar said, he talked about dialectical materialism, where matter has an inherent quality to develop itself. So this is not visible actually. This is the essence of matter which makes the matter to move forward. not backward, and every stage of history is in development over the previous stage. So this should be clear in our mind, and also, as Himanshu Babu said, the His materialism is distinctly different from the 18th century materialism, where the 18th century materialists concluded that man is a product, of his own environment. This is called mechanical materialism because here man does not have the capability to change the environment or to intervene in the environment, rather is pushed by the environment, and the environment develops man the way it likes. So therefore, Marx was highly critical of that 18th century materialism, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, he was highly influenced by the Hegelian idea of dialectics. As we all know, dialectic means where the society or the matter moves through contradictions. As that is the law is the law of unity of opposites. When the positive and negative current both come together, we find light. Similarly, the thesis and antithesis, when they clash with each other, they produce something called synthesis, which is a higher version of thesis as well as antithesis. So Marx concluded that man is just not a mechanical being, just shaped by the environment. Rather, man actively shapes the world he lives in, while the world shapes him. So it is a two-way process. The environment shapes him, at the same time, the man actively shapes the environment. How it happens? Because man produces history and is a product of society. As Himanshu Babu said, that production and reproduction is a continuous process in the society. So man produces history and is also a product of this society. Now, if we just see one thing, that in 19th century world, or you can say Europe, Marx thought the main concern for Marx was that how can men be free in such a society? This primary question actually pushed or motivated Marx to create such a great theory. If given the unequal society, given the social constraints in which human beings lived in 19th century society, given the social constraints in which majority of the population in the society lived, how can they be free in such a society? That was Marx's major concern. Whereas if you just consider the other sociologists, it is said Emile Durkheim, Karl Marx, and Max Weber, these three are the great sociologists that we have, which shaped all social sciences in different ways, in diverse ways. But for Durkheim, the main concern was holds the society together? Emily Durkheim, another sociologist, who said, what holds the society together? He gave a different formula for the ancient society, or you can say fused society, and a different formula for the modern society. He said in ancient society or in a fused society, we have mechanical solidarity, we depend on each other, so we are attached to each other. We have fused roles. In a modern society, we live like atomic individuals, though we are part of the society. So there is organic solidarity. So the bonds in the society in the pre-modern stage is more, whereas in the bonds in the society in the modern era is in an industrial society is less. So therefore he concluded that alienation is one aspect of such a modern society, and this is the reason of suicide rates, higher suicide rates in modern society. This is the thesis of Emile Durkheim. So his main concern was what holds the society together. For Marx, that was not the main concern. For Marx, the main concern was how the man will be free. Because through his readings, through his realizations, he strongly believed that human beings have enormous potential. Human beings have enormous brain faculty, reasoning faculty, and they can create a heavenly society. They can create a heaven on earth where there will be no exploitation, where there will be no conflict, no contradiction. Everybody will love each other, because hatred comes out of exploitation. Hatred comes when we all who are living in this society are not caring for each other. So therefore Marx concluded that what is required for human beings is freedom. So his main concern was how can men be free. So when he became clear about dialectical materialism, he wanted to apply this methodology to historical materialism. So what you find is that Marx gave us two methodologies. One is dialectical materialism, the other is historical materialism. That means he is such a scientist who devised a method and taught us how to apply to study social change, how to apply to study social development, I would say, because dialectics is a progressive methodology. In dialectical materialism, there is nothing called backward movement. Every movement is forward, because matter has an inherent capacity to develop. So it develops through contradictions, and the contradictions are also inherent in matter. So you can say that dialectical materialism taught us how to study social progress or social development. Okay. Now, why it is called historical materialism? This is called historical materialism because it looks at change over time, and it is historical because it looks at social change or change in society over time, and it is materialism as it concerns with material reality, material condition of human beings. Okay. Now, to analyze historical materialism, uh, Marx concluded, and Marx tried to understand this historical materialism in terms of analyzing different stages of history, beginning from the primitive communism. Now, he said that no part of history can be studied in isolation, as labor is a social enterprise. As I told you, man produces history and is a product of history. How it is that he said that the the history begins from the material reality, and that is man starts his production process because it is required for him to fulfill his physical needs. Now, while in the process of fulfilling his physical needs, uh, in order to survive in nature, man interacts with nature, and in the while interacting with nature, man experiences certain natural constraints. When men experience certain natural constraints, men feel like coming together and producing in a group, by which we come to know that there is this labor is a social enterprise. It is because if you leave a man in a forest, that man cannot live properly because there he is all alone. Marx said that man is a social animal, he agreed. So when man has that brain power, man is trying to produce food in interaction with the nature, he experiences those natural constraints of forces of production, and this natural constraints he tries to overcome with the help of other human beings. So therefore, men feel the necessity of working together as they are poorly adapted to the natural world, unlike the animals and birds. So men in group can produce more than men in isolation. This is what Marx taught us. And therefore, labor is a social enterprise. So when they come together, they overcome the natural constraints and production continues, and cooperatively men survive and the history moves on. In primitive communism, in the last class, Professor Acharya had to talk to you about primitive communism. In primitive communism, men were having no unequal relationships. So there were no social constraints, only natural constraints. All of them were working together, and since there was no unequal relationship, there was no negative feelings towards each other. So therefore, in primitive communism, there were no classes. Men together survived, could overcome the natural constraints. Then comes the next phase. In the next phase, The process of production is a continuous process. Production continued, but the next phase was a different phase where some could, through their intelligence, they could gather more and more land. They could become masters, and the other group could not accumulate property, and finally they became the slaves. So the unequal society, the seeds of the unequal society was sown, and people started experiencing social constraint and subjugation. So this is the next stage where we have a master and slave relationship, and the society is divided into different unequal social groups. And one group is experiencing social constraints, the other group was not experiencing social constraints, was happy with the status quo. The masters were happy with the status quo, but the slaves were not happy with the status quo, so they wanted change. So the desire for change ultimately results the forces results in social change, and history moves on. This is how the next stage comes, the feudalistic stage, where again we have this unequal relationship, and unequal relationships, as I told you, always created social constraints for one group, though the other group with riches were happy and wanted to maintain the status quo. Okay, uh, so gradually when history moved on, every stage of history produced multiple social constraints. ଗୋଟେ minute ଟିକେ. Multiple social constraints. Why multiple social constraints? Because as you know, because you have already read historical materialism, as you know, we have forces of production which constitute the factories, the machines, the monetary arrangement, the market, and the relations of production. The relations of production means the productive relations between the different social groups in the society. Marx says that forces of production and relations of production taken together constitute the mode of production which indicates a stage in history. The only thing is that the forces of production and the relations of production contradict each other. Why? Because forces of production develop at a faster rate than relations of production. So relations of production work as feeders or social constraints for which create contradictions in the society, and the society, there is tension and there is conflict in the society. So relations of production is nothing but how people organize themselves around labor. So the relations of production, the forces of production, or the economic relationships between different social groups create a superstructure, and that superstructure in which contains politics, religion, culture, and even family is not left out from it. So what happens? A particular type of economic system creates a particular type of uh, society, a particular type of political system, economic system, cultural system, and also the social relationships within the family. This we could know when feminism became quite developed, and they gave us this idea that personal is political. During feudalism, we talked about a joint family system where women were not allowed to go out of the house. They managed agriculture, but they processed the agricultural produce. They did not go to the field, even if they went to the field and that was their own field, they did not work as agricultural laborers. But in the industrial society, we have ଟିକେ ଗୋଟେ ମିନିଟ୍ ହ୍ୟାଲୋ ତମେ ଗାଁରୁ ଆସିଗଲ ହଉ 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 ମୁଁ ମିଟିଂରେ ଅଛି ତମ ସାଙ୍ଗେ ଟିକେ ପଛରେ କଥା ହେବି ହଁ ହଁ So what you find is that got disturbed. So economic factors exert primary influence as it relates to man's basic needs, that is the food gathering. Society progresses through conflicts and contradictions. It is because, as I told you, forces of production and relations of production contradict each other. Now, in the process, what you find is that we have classes in society, and these classes are not occupational categories, rather, they are social classes having similar relationship to forces of production. That means they can be employer and employee, they can be industrialists and workers, they can be landlords and tenants. Now, where you find that the classes, they have the similar economic status and they have the similar lifestyle and similar life chances. By lifestyle, we understand the way they live, their food habits, their housing, their standard of living, and life chances means the opportunities their household or their children or they themselves get in the process of living. Initially, the members of a particular class do not have consciousness. That is what Marx says. They were not conscious of their social identity. They were not conscious of their social constraints. They continued to be oppressed, they continue to be exploited, and they accept the material condition of their living as it is. But gradually, as capitalism grows, conflict grows, crisis in capitalism emerges because there is more production, there is mass production, and there is no purchasing power with the majority. Why it happens? Because the bourgeois, as Marx says, is more after appropriating the surplus as it wants more profit and doesn't want to share the profit with the workers, and the work is not interested to give proper wages to the workers. So the workers have a less than subsistence level wage, which doesn't fulfill their basic needs. So they leave dissatisfied, they continue to be in a very, very depressing situation. And gradually, what happens, this process of uh, depression, exploitation continues, and as there is mass production, but the workers are not having purchasing capacity, the industrialists think that the workers are actually, the industrialist is not in a condition to sell their products. So as you know, as a consequent result of this, imperialism came into being. They wanted to pacify their workers in their country and tried to exploit the workers in the colonies. So this is a vicious circle which actually, gradually it happened like this, that the workers became more and more poorer and poorer, and the society in capitalism, the modern society, got divided into two groups: the haves and the have-nots. That means the bourgeois and the proletariat. The proletariat had nothing to own because it had no control over the forces of production, it had no ownership over the forces of production, and it had no freedom also, as there were no labor laws. And this Marx says as a stage of polarization, where the diverse social groups convert into two social groups. One is the bourgeois, the other is the proletariat. Then this polarization again converts into the next stage is homogenization. That means one owning the means of production, the other not owning the means of production, and all of them are depressed, are feeling exploited, and their poverty, their insufficiency is increasing in geometric progression. So what you find the next is that this gives them a feeling that they are oppressed. So the class consciousness develops in them, and class consciousness resulting in class solidarity, and finally it results, after the class solidarity, the class struggle in reality happens, revolution comes, and then the next stage of uh, revolution, that is a better society where the capitalism would be destroyed and the proletariat would have its own society, its own dictatorship for a brief period. After that, a society will come where there will be no state, stateless society. Now, while applying dialectical materialism to study history in 19th century, Marx could not visualize a globalized world in 21st century where we will be having diverse conflicts in society. Today, we are having gender conflict, we are having race conflict, we are having
Madam, Please unmute yourself.
Acha, acha, acha. Okay, okay. Okay, I'm repeating it again. অসুবিধা হলো। ওহো, okay. I think I could not I think I could not explain what is a class and how did he consider the conflicts. For Karl Marx, class is not an occupational category, though it is a economic category, or it is an economic group, in the sense that the members of the class, that is proletariat, all of them, they are having similar, more or less similar economic status and similar standard of living. In other words, the members of the class have similar life chances and lifestyle. I hope you understand what is lifestyle. They had the similar, they could afford similar type of foods. They could afford similar style of living, and because their economic standard is more or less similar, and they have similar life chances. That means their households have access to minimum resources or no resources at all. So the life chances for themselves or their children is very, very limited. Like, so this is a very, very interesting thing that Marx could visualize, and which holds true even today. So now, when these classes in the capitalistic society, they could overcome the natural constraint, because men are working together, maybe in different capacities as industrialists and workers, but they are working together. So they have overcome the natural constraints because there is rapid technological advancement. But they are not able to, the society is not able to overcome the social constraints. The wealthy few, the rich few, the bourgeois is satisfied with the arrangement, is happy with the status quo, because it is the bourgeois who has captured political power. It is the bourgeois which has scripted the elements of culture. It is the bourgeois which has shaped the social norms. So therefore, the bourgeois is satisfied in the society, doesn't feel constrained at all, but the proletariat feels exploited, suffocated, depressed, and feel that there is no freedom in the society. So since the bourgeois, the proletariat is not getting the benefits of its own labor, so proletariat is wants change, because the proletariat is starving. The industrialists or the bourgeois always have an idea that the proletariat is lazy. This I'm sharing. In fact, it is not in the interpretations of the Marxist writings. When I read the writings of administrative thinkers, I found that all the time the administrative thinkers, the classical theorists, they have written that the workers were lazy, they are only economic man. If you give them little monetary incentive, they will work hard, otherwise they will not work hard. So you must have heard about an engineer come administrative thinker, Frederick Winslow Taylor, who gave us the scientific management theory. He said that he was a worker as well as a chief executive. He had worked in both the capacities. So he thought that unnecessarily we are blaming the workers that they are lazy. It is better the managers, that means the owners, should do research and find out what is the best way of doing a work. So when the worker comes to the industry, the worker is to be given a task prescription, what is to be done and which instrument is to be taken from the store. And the worker is to be given wages for every piece of work done. Piece rate wage system. No, he had a feeling for the workers, but he was not ready to give the right to raise their voices, because he thought, we have given everything. Why should they have freedom? Since Taylor did not give freedom, Taylor's philosophy was rejected by the workers. It was a philosophy of early 20th century. Since he was critical of the owners or the managers also did not like his philosophy. Both the parties had rejected Taylor's philosophy, though today all MBA graduates are reading his philosophy. So what you find that the industrialists, they were satisfied with the arrangement, social arrangement, but the proletariats were not satisfied with the social arrangement, so they wanted change. Now, how the change would come? Marx said that the change would come through contradictions, because this is, he viewed society in a dialectical way. He said, change comes through contradictions. Progress comes through contradictions. When the industry, if you consider bourgeois as the thesis and the proletariat as the antithesis, the opposing groups, when they clash with each other, something very interesting will come out. And that interesting result is development of class consciousness among the workers. The workers become, you can think in these terms that this is, in a way, right now we are experiencing some sort of identity politics. So the proletariats, they gained consciousness as they became poorer and poorer, and all diverse social groups, because of poverty, the society, they were converted into two polarized groups. One is the bourgeois, the other is the proletariat, and they were having the similar conditions. The bourgeois was thinking that the workers are not doing the work properly, they are lazy, so they had no sympathy for the workers, and the workers had developed some sort of consciousness. So they had developed anti feelings or hatredness towards the bourgeois. So in the process, what you find is that it is a vicious circle of poverty. So the poor becomes more poorer. So the third stage is pauperization, after which the class, that means the proletariat, gains consciousness, and this consciousness is converted into class solidarity. And Marx says that the class which was class in itself previously now becomes class for itself and ready to launch the revolution, ready to launch the class struggle and raise their voice against the bourgeois for establishing equality and freedom in the society. Now, after all of you know about dictatorship of the proletariat. I need not get into that. Revolution happens, then dictatorship of the proletariat comes into being. And during the dictatorship of the proletariat, the state is not disappearing. With the help of the state machinery, the proletariat destroys every symbol of capitalism: physical, mental, material, non-material. Every symbol of capitalism, because that is a symbol of exploitation. So the proletariat destroys every symbol of capitalism. Then the new society comes into being, where the society is a society of equals, and it is a society of it is a stateless society. Because Marx strongly believed that human beings are not bad, as the way Thomas Hobbes had believed that human beings are selfish and egoistic. Marx did not believe that. Marx believed that human being, man is a social being. They have understood that they can produce more in together in groups. So they do not suspect each other. It is the social arrangement actually which has created these negative feelings, these contradictory feelings in them. So when all human beings becomes good, becomes uh, you know, care for each other, a different type of society would come. We become very critical of Marx, saying that that society has not come into being. That might be true, but a philosopher is a product of his own time. A philosopher visualizes the future the way he sees it. The 19th century Karl Marx could not visualize that at one point of time states would come together and sit and discuss about sustainable development goals or common goals of humanity. The states would come together to and will sit together to talk about climate change. Because at that point of time also, when there was imperialism uh, in practice, he did not talk about war among nations. He talked about the contradictions in the society, the exploitation in the society. See, he did not talk about war among the nations. So, therefore, he thought that all these things are happening. It is because the social arrangement is such. It is actually destroying the true nature of human beings. If we have a good society, we will have governance there, but not a state which is an instrument of exploitation. So we actually, this is how I have understood Karl Marx, because I do not feel like criticizing such a great personality. It is not that I blindly, but what I feel that the 19th century society needed a philosophy like this. He had never thought that we will have a society where we will sit together and discuss about our common goals, or we will have a society where we will have both state actors as well as non-state actors. But the methodology that he gave us, the conflict theory, is true even today. Because we have gender conflict. And if we apply the dialectical materialism or the historical materialism given by Marx, we can understand why it is that women were kept out of the political system, though we had a mass democracy. Why is it that when we talked about all men are equal, we are having intersectional inequality? Why is it that when we are talking about all men are equal because all have reason, all have natural rights, we are having race conflict and we are intolerant of different cultures? Though today the world has reached such a stage that we have multiculturalism as a part of our existence, national existence, but we are developing intolerance for the other culture, which is the other for us, and we do not belong to that culture. So I find, we need to explore the methodology of Marx more and more in the true sense of its in true letter and spirit, and that is what was done by Antonio Gramsci. All the while he tried to answer the question, though he was also in prison, that how is it that the bourgeois continues to rule for so long? He gave us a theory that is called theory of hegemony, which uh, actually creates a social arrangement where all social groups start believing in that theory of hegemony and become a part of it. That is how patriarchy has informed all social institutions in our society. So I hope I have been able to make my understanding clear, and I have shared clearly my understanding. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Uh, so thank you, madam. Kindly mute yourself.
Yes. No, okay. Huh.
So thank you, madam. I mean, this is no doubt, it's not an easy topic to handle. For me also, I was the convener and moderator. So I also downloaded an article, I read it. Then, when I heard from you, then I'm getting some clarity. But since then also, I have to review whatever you have said, once I upload it in the YouTube, and we will all listen to you very carefully. What you are saying, that it is understandable, but how you are connecting, there is always a meaning between the lines. So understanding between the lines is very difficult, and the way you are connecting, we have to follow you. So we have among us, Professor Patnaik is there. And before I come to him and his observation on this talk, let me tell you, since I'm the moderator, so I have to make everything easy for my student. The topic was how historical materialism can be used as an approach to do the research. The hallmark of dialectical Marxist approach or historical materialism or dialectical materialism are that there is an emphasis on real, socially, and historically conditioned context. Right? So there is a context, social context, there is a historical context. For every research you do, there is a context, and you cannot bypass that context. That's the first lesson from the historical materialism. The second lesson is that there is a focus on production and reproduction of everyday life. I mean, you are the reason of everyday life, and everyday life is also the reason for you also. I mean, you make the history and you are the product of the history. An emphasis on the web of social relation that exist within the larger social totality. Right. So, I mean, whatever we do, whatever we think, you know, there is a diversity of, human behavior, human thinking, and all this diversity is somewhere other. It is connected with a larger totality, with a larger, epistemology, right? And we have to understand that epistemology, an emphasis on the web of social relations that exist within the larger social totality. Then examining multiple lines of evidence, material and historical, at multiple scales to identify the contradictory messages. That is very crucial. You do any kind of researcher, and every researcher, you have to do this practice of multiple lines of evidence collection, and you have to examine it on multiple scales. Then interpreting how these relate to the internal dynamics of the society, right? Once you are bringing these multiple evidence, you are examining these multiple evidence on multiple scales, then you have to connect uh, your analysis with the internal dynamics of the society. For example, in the previous class, how Acharya sir told that how that quantitative change ultimately it is shifting to a qualitative change, right? So there is a relation between the quantity and quality, right? And we have to understand it, how that shift happens. And the last, that using this understanding to engage in praxis in modern world in which we work, right? As I mentioned in the earlier, that what distinguishes historical materialism from the other social theories is actually praxis. And praxis involves the dialectical interrelationship between critic, knowledge, and action. So, critic reveals the oppression. Knowledge helps to understand the oppressive structure, and action provides the basis to take action. And all these things, critique, knowledge, and action, is required to transform the society. So before you transform the society, you have to do, whatever I just said right now. You have to do all the practices before you, change the society, or before you bring some broad conclusion in your research. So thank you, madam. I think I have to re-listen you so that I can make you sense better and better. Right now, I am welcoming Patnaik sir, Professor Patnaik, and he can share his own observation. Sir, please. Sir, are you there?
But let the participants ask.
He's there in the participant list, but maybe at this moment he may not be. He may.
Participants mane kon pacharibe pacharantu.
So now this floor is open. You can ask your question on this topic. Any student who wants to ask? There is a
what is the difference between, there is a question, what is the difference between class in itself and class for itself? This is very simple. In the process of, as Himanshu sir said, it is a difficult topic, and mu majire tike break hai gali, moro flow of thought ta tike epart sar kai gala. Basically, when it's a way of when you are just thinking about yourself. When you are thinking about your own self, the social group is just concerned about itself, then the member, that class is not having the consciousness, not having the solidarity, it is class in itself. When the group thinks of uniting together, to fight out oppression, then it is converted into class for itself. Now, from Marxian thought, one thing is very clear and which can be used in any sociological research is that the social location of a social actor limits his or her choices. Like, take for an example, transgender. Social location means what I feel, the group you belong, the social group you belong, and the society in which you are living. What is the idea of the society about your group? So, finest example is transgenders, where they are able-bodied human beings, but since the social the social discussion, or you can say the social norms treat them differently, so that is how they have a different type of social positioning in our society. I hope you understand it. Himanshu Babu, now please request
Uh,
Patnaik sir to give
right,
his.
right. I have already written in the chat box. Sir, are you there?
Yeah, I am there, but let others participate.
Okay, right now they are actually writing the questions in the chat box, and I have already mentioned it that I am welcoming you. You can also speak on this topic, your observation or your understanding on this topic.
No, I am here to listen to students. Let students participate more.
Okay. Okay, madam. Then there are some questions here. Pragya has asked that why Karl Marx philosophy is referred to as historical materialism. Again, it's a simple question, but madam,
It's a very
you
simple question. I had already very clearly told about it. It is materialism as it concerns itself with the material reality in which the social actor finds itself. It is historical because it looks at change, social change over the time. So this is how it has been named as historical materialism. And what I have read, Marx has not used this word historical materialism. Arun Babu and Himanshu Babu will confirm it. It is Marx has used the word materialistic interpretation of history. Any other question?
there is another question by Braja Sundar Naik. So, can you please relate Karl Marx and Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of free society?
This Arun Babu will supplement this answer. Any other? Can you tell us about research methodology, ma'am?
No, I think this is
No.
not a related question.
This is not a question.
Patnaik sir,
Yeah.
Because he will be able to answer this question better.
I mean, madam has referred this question to you.
No, there is one more. Yeah.
Okay, he will come late actually. So Patnaik sir will come late.
Okay.
Pradeep again, he is asking, even today I find class polarization is still growing, particularly in India. What will happen to the society if it will continue for the next 10 years? I mean,
there will be, if we believe in Marx, then the process will continue, and there will be more inequality. And when there will be more inequality, there will be polarization.
Now, what actually, I mean, there is an intention of this question that, change is always for better. And he is saying what kind of change after 10 years it will come and we can call it better from Marxian perspective.
I'm very optimistic about the change, in the sense that there is a case going on in Barampur. regarding marital conflict. I am following that case since the day one when I came to know about the case. Not that I am interested to know what is happening in the marital conflict, but I want to know what is the understanding of the public regarding the legislation, PWDV Act 2005. That is the legislation. What is their understanding? What I find from that social conflict or tension that is going on in the society, public is coming in support of the girl. So what I find is that gradually people are gaining consciousness about the law. So here also what I feel that after 10 years people will start, those who are experiencing exploitation, they will certainly raise their voice, and they will try to get the benefits by raising their voice through the government. And that is the result of, because of that we are having this this progressive legislations. And the other thing that you can say that there might come a situation where the poor or the marginalized will try to snatch the power, and they will get united and capture the political power, and accordingly the things will be different. But the point is that unity is a far-fetched dream, what I feel, because there are so many conflicts, intersectional conflicts that we find.
That is very important, actually. I mean,
So now
conflicts,
today, intersectionality is a very, very important issue.
and it's very difficult to locate a conflict and how to solve it when
And
it is
identity
connected.
politics is also dividing the marginalized. That is the thing.
Yes. I think identity politics is dividing both majority and minority, right? So it's important
Identity
thing is that
politics is dividing majority and minority. Identity politics is also dividing diverse social groups.
True.
Like, you will find that reserve category and non-reserve category. Now, within the reserve category, one group is not in favor of the other group.
Yeah.
So this is this.
And the whole problem is that, the importance of the right then duty. Actually, in duty, we always concern about other, then next is myself. But in identity politics, it's all about me, I, and myself.
Yes.
Then others. This is the problem, actually. So now, sir, please come. We are waiting to listen you on this issue. Oh, again,
Yes,
Sanjay
we
is
are
asking.
approaching
Again,
it.
Sanjay is asking some question. Madam,
Yes.
please listen. What is the meaning of parliamentary politics as a bourgeois? What he has written? Bourgeois?
Bourgeois Sam, stated by Lenin.
Acha,
It is
हाँ.
bourgeoisie same.
Bourgeoisie Sam. Acha, हाँ. Can you
Okay.
explain, Sanjay?
Actually, Lenin has commented on parliamentary politics. It is a bourgeoisie same. Actually, I could not get it.
Okay, okay. He has read it somewhere. So, madam,
Yes.
can you?
Yes. What I feel is that Lenin did not believe in this, parliamentary politics. Am I right, Himanshu Babu?
Yeah.
Lenin did not believe in parliamentary politics. Can you answer this question? I think you can better answer this question.
No, I think I will leave it to Patnaik, sir. Sir, please enter.
Yeah, actually, she is right. Lenin didn't believe in parliamentary institutions. He called all parliamentary institutions as sham, as fake. Sham is fake. So, but he forgot that the history of universal suffrage rights, which is the basis of parliamentary institutions. Workers, middle class, all the wage earners played a very critical role. Without them, we could not have achieved universal adult suffrage, the basic founding principle of parliamentary institutions. It's true that parliamentary institutions operated as instruments of bourgeoisie for a long period of time, from Locke's time till about 19th century. But state operates as an independent institution, as an organic institution in society, which cannot wither away. This is the basic problem with the whole the Marxist theory that believes that the state can wither away. So, but the nature of state can be contested, can be altered, and can be transformed. That has been the basic goal of all the marginalized communities in history. And some own it, some criticize it. Gradually, over a period of time, even those who believe in withering of state, they have given up this idea. Communist parties of India, they still have written in their manifesto, state to wither away. But they are no more practicing, they are no more professing it in public life. That indicates that such slogans are no more relevant. But the question is, therefore, some of the Marx formulations must be subjected to critical inquiry. But his basic thrust that if inequalities are polarized, they grow further, and they become intolerable, society must question them. That will remain inspirational, and it will guide large number of people across the world. But as one should know, we are talking about historical materialism. In historical materialism, the idea is that we must try to understand history. Historical materialism without history has no sense. It essentially is a method to understand history. And what is history? In German ideology, Marx says the history of two kinds. One is history of nature, other history of society. History of nature is also subject to history of society. As history of society keeps changing, socialization of nature also keeps changing. The way we interact with nature depends on the way we interact with each other. So it is because today, for example, we are talking of ecology, because we find it unbearable to live. So our interaction with each other has a limited role. If nature loses its character, loses its sign, then human civilization will die its death. It cannot continue to be human civilization. Human civilization is based on nature's gifts. Therefore, better to respect nature and modulate our behavior vis-a-vis nature. Therefore, to modulate our behavior vis-a-vis nature, we must modulate our behavior vis-a-vis each other. We can't modulate our behavior towards nature unless we reform ourselves within, unless we transform ourselves within. That's where Marx project is perennially relevant. Marx essentially tells you that it is important that we must understand the history of nature, history of society, in their intersectionality. This is also one kind of intersectionality. You have one history in collaboration with the other history, and it's the movement of one history impacts the movement of other history. History of society has impacted history of nature. Today, environmental movement is based on this supposition that we have created a society which is intolerable for nature. If nature finds society intolerable, then nature will die its death. In the process, we will die our death. We cannot, if nature dies, we can't live. Simple point made by the environmental Marxian project. Marx was deeply worried about that. In Capital Volume 1, he talked about many of these issues. Some of them are not discussed by us. And the result, we think Marx has nothing to say on environment. In fact, he was acutely aware of exploitation of soil, water, forest, and so on and so forth by capitalism. He was very critical of it. He said, you can't destroy soil, you can't destroy fertilization of soil, you can't destroy water by commercialization of agriculture. This and by profit-making agriculture, you are creating a profit-making society which is taking away soil, taking away water, taking away forests. And in Capital Volume 1, he writes, all those insights were missed by his followers. We missed out them quite. It's true that Marx didn't examine gender inequality because as everybody has Sonaway Appa said quite well. Everybody is a product of his time. You cannot anticipate what might happen in 1960s. Feminist movement came in 1960s. Women's concerns were there. There are some kind of feminism was there. Therefore, historical materialism is about understanding dynamics of history. Some dynamics might be understood by Marx quite well. Some dynamics of his time and our time probably are not grasped by Marx quite well. Therefore, his followers who must create that space. Therefore, what is important for historical materialism is that we need to be context sensitive. We must admit our limitations and overcome the limitations imposed by new and new context, new forms of history. Therefore, this dynamism was missed by most of those people who followed historical materialism. They said, oh, are you talking class? No, you are not talking class. So if you don't talk class, you are not historical materialist. That's not true. When I talk about class, for example, class analysis is of Marx, what he has adopted for Europe, can it be applied in India? This question is very important for us because historical materialism tells you that nature also has history. So also human history, human beings have their own history, and histories differ geographically, depending on our resources, depending on natural zones. Our history is modulated by our interaction with each other and interaction with nature. Therefore, ultimately, history depends on our interaction with nature. Nature is, you read the German ideology, Marx says quite clearly, nature doesn't give equal endowments to all geographies. Somewhere nature is resourceful, bountiful. Somewhere nature is less resourceful. Somewhere nature is unfavorable. So somewhere nature is favorable. If you look at geography in India, you will understand what Marx says. Therefore, it is important that you cannot, that within those limitations offered by nature, within those geographical restrictions, constraints offered by nature, we must we must interact with each other. We must live in society. We must something is therefore it is important for you to understand that Marx project has its limitations of its time, context, and it has strength because he offers us, he gives us a vision of society which must believe in equality. But then, can we create a society without constraints? A society cannot be created without constraints. There's another problem with Marx. This problem must be addressed by all of us. Marx assumed that we can create a society that is free from constraints. There are two kinds of rhythm in Marx. In one rhythm is he argues that society must recognize constraints created by nature. Yeah, it does say say it in several places. But he assumed that that is happening only under capitalism. And so if capitalism goes, society will be free from constraints. Is that really true? That's not true, because society can never free itself from constraints of nature. It can never. If it does, then it will create a headache for itself. It will destroy itself. Therefore, people like Balgopal, environmentalists, they have been arguing that Marx's idea of praxis has no idea that the praxis has limitations. You cannot practice everything. If you practice everything, you may destroy yourself. You may destroy nature. And that's what environmentalists have been saying. Therefore, production for sake of production will not help us. It's a production that must respect nature and must admit that every act of production has inherent limitations. So far as nature and nature's resources are concerned, nature's endowments are concerned. Therefore, Marx has no idea that nature provides us limits, which must be respected, which must be considered as a constraint, under which act of production must take place. Marx emphasizes act of production, but the act of production is unlimited possibility. There's unlimited notion of praxis, which is there in Marx, has produced a society of different kinds. It's produced a society very repressive and very, very intolerant. So this is one problem with Marx materialism. We all should be aware of it. There is two visions, actually, the diachronic rhymes in Marx. On the one hand, he talks about two different histories, and those differences must be respected. On the other hand, he produced limitless freedom, limitless equality, which is again a vision which is in challenge with his own vision. Therefore, this duality in Marx must be addressed. We can't simply keep quiet on anomalies in Marx. Second anomaly, which I told you in my last class, is that Marx remains intolerant of his contemporaries. What does it mean? He is very tolerant of his past thinkers. He is very tolerant of Aristotle. He is very tolerant of even Plato, and so on and so forth, Rousseau. But he is very intolerant of contemporaries. It means one thing. It means that Marx has produced an ideology which is self-enclosed, which is self-expressive, says that and not amenable to correction. So anybody who corrects that ideology will be treated as Marx treated his contemporaries. Now therefore Marx has created a binary between himself and most of his contemporary philosophers. It's true that one must, he was very critical of J.S. Mill, who was actually his friend. And he was very dismissal of everybody around him. But he is very fond of everybody before him. In my view, this creates a binary. If you are a friend of the past thinkers, you can't be enemy of the present thinkers. This, in my view, is an anomaly. It's important, you must criticize everybody, I agree. But to criticize everybody, you must criticize past thinkers as well as present thinkers. At the same time, you must also appreciate past contributions and present contributions. Therefore, this Marxism has developed a monopoly stake in truth. This ideology is inherently Marx itself. No point in simply blaming Stalin and others, Lenin and others, not Marx. I don't think that formulation is valid. And it's important for us to recognize that historical materialism must be tolerant, must be willing to learn from everybody else. Today, the communist parties have exhibited a greater degree of intolerance towards Ambedkarism and feminism then even bourgeoisie. Why it has happened? It has happened because communists try to identify, oh, you are not talking class, so we dismiss you. That dismissal attitude, which is inherent in Marxist way of thinking, must be addressed by most of us if we want to participate in democratic experiments in our time. And then we must be open-minded about our limitations. We must openly discuss our limitations. No point in glorifying Marx. No point in glorifying ourselves. And better to admit limitations and say that Marxism has this limited role, and others will play important role as well in carrying forward historical projects. And to put the universal burden of history on Marxism is also a mistake. So historical materialism has a very limited task, and some of them are flawed within itself because materialism assumes that we can transform everything. You can't transform everything. There are certain things can't be transformed. If they are transformed, we will destroy ourselves. Therefore, it is important to know limitations of historical materialism. That awareness of limitations of historical materialism, which has been pointed out to us by feminism to some extent, by environmental movement to some extent, must be respected by Marxists. If Marxists have to remain alive in our contemporary time, it's important for us to recognize the limits of our praxis, limits of our appreciation of act of production. Because historical materialism critically depends on the notion of production. The notion of production has limitations, and production has limitations internally and externally. It has there are forces of reproduction which are not captured by production. Similarly, production has inherent limit. You can't produce everything, which will destroy the very act of production. So therefore, these two important limitations are necessary for historical materialism to understand. But as Sonnovapa said and others have noted, historical materialism will inspire us. It will inspire us to, so long as inequalities are found oppressive and intolerable. People will draw inspiration from historical materialism as well to oppose inequalities and oppose oppressions which are intolerable. Then are inequalities intolerable? And then question that Rawls asks, can we create a society of equals? Can we create three individuals? What of justice all equal? And so these questions are very important. Therefore, it's also important for those who believe in creating a society of perfect equality to address these questions, they address these concerns. So they are all relevant questions, and people, because of the search for equality, is always on. I agree, but question is, what kind of equality is that? Is it a perfect equality, or is it a kind of equity-based politics which tries to minimize inequalities, as Rawls would put it? Therefore, the concern of democratic socialism, according to Rawls, is a very important concern of history of politics of production, around which historical materialism is based on. The basis of historical materialism is the act of production must be appreciated. That's where Marx made a historical discovery for us. Right. That is a major discovery, and that will remain inspirational to a great extent. However, the rest must be critically examined by us. We can't simply blindly follow Marx. And there are very inadequacies in Marx theory. And Gramsci points out major inadequacies, which I told you in my first class. So, theory of institutions. There is no theory of civil society in Marx. Only act of production and production-based associations. But as Gramsci says that civil society is not a production-based association. Civil society mediates between production units and the state power on the other hand. It is a mediatory body, and it contributes to hegemony. It contributes to civilized culture. It contributes to many things which Marx has not theorized. Marx has not grasped them. Therefore, it is important for us to understand this. Somebody is able to hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
It's a very interesting question. You can address that. Why part of the world is so critical to Marx?
Oh, I'm not worried about it, but my question is if
No, it's there is a question one participant has asked why part of the world is so critical to Marx. The question is based on an American statement.
don't celebrate Karl Marx, his communism has a death count in million. Why part of the world is so critical of Marx? See, I think capitalists would like to bury Marx. That's quite clear. And I have no interest to defend that project. Therefore, people, so long as people like
I mean,
Marx,
sir, there is, I can say, you are also critical about Marx, and America is also critical about Marx, but there is a difference between you and America.
Yeah, true. So Marx can't be buried with the fact that his ideas have come back again and again, despite so many histories have passed, so many attempts to bury him have been made by the capitalist press and the capitalist class. People have been come back, have been able to retrieve Marx again and again, because his ideas remain inspirational. His criticism remains very basic. In 19th century, as Chandra said, you should understand a philosopher in terms of his time. 19th century, how many people told us that you have two histories. History of nature is different from history of human society. And history of human society, one unit of life is production and production relation. How many philosophers told us this? Nobody, except Marx. Therefore, he gives us secular understanding of history
Yes.
for the first time. And I'm not saying that is the last time, the first time. But they made a very interesting intervention. That the problem with Marxists is they have created a universal model out of it. The problem is, therefore, don't attribute that method. For that, Marx himself is responsible because he didn't clarify his positions more often. And he was self-critical of himself. He never wrote about that. So to some extent, I blame him. But point is, the secular understanding of human history was discovered by him like nobody else before him. Afterwards, many people have found similarity with his history. People like Bertrand Russell, who is not a Marxist, Anthony Giddens, who is not a Marxist, they appreciate Marx. So why there is appreciation of Marx by non-Marxists like Russell, like Anthony Giddens? That question is important. Well, you can't dismiss Marx altogether.
No.
Not everybody is critical of Marx. But those who are critical of Marx, they are not dismissal of Marx, like Russell and like Anthony Giddens, or like me. So, therefore, it's important for us to understand who are those people who are critical and what kind of criticism is that. That is valid criticism, not valid criticism.
So thank you, sir. Thank you for your, introduction and intervention. I mean, I always find you as a kind of critic, and one can be critic only when one understand the whole. Then only one can criticize the part. 40 participants were there when the talk was going, but right now it's only 13. So it's maybe it's going to be nearly 2 hours. This talk is going
Yes,
on. So
yes, 6:30 to
I
8:30.
request Sanjay to give thanks or vote of thanks. Sanjay, please.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to all of you. Respected Professor Swarnamai Tripathi, Madam, retired Professor, Department of Public Administration, Utkal University, Bani Bihar. Respected Professor Arun Kumar Patnaik, sir, Dean School of Social Science, Hyderabad Central University, and and convener of this webinar. Actually, it is not a webinar; it is an online class. I can say, Dr. Himanshu Shekhar Misra, sir, and all the participants. Uh, it seems to be a great honor to propose a vote of thanks to all who have helped us uh, in making this class a very resounding success. First of all, I would like to give my hearty thanks to uh, Chief Speaker Professor Swarnamai Tripathi, Madam, who taught us Karl Marx today. The topic was, uh, historical materialism as a research method, a discussion. He has well justified, I think. Then I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Patnaik, uh, who who is always with us, is helping us in our academic exploration, and I would especially thanks to the convener of this class, Dr. Himanshu Shekhar Misra, uh, who always take great initiative for us to take knowledge from anything and anyone. Uh, Thank you, sir, for being a guiding force for every new step forwards. And last but not the least, uh, my deep sense of thanks and appreciation goes to all the participants who were live with us and attend this class with great enthusiasm and made today's event a great success. Thank you all and thank you all participants. Uh, have a great day.
So thank you, Sanjay.
Thank
And
you very
I'm also thankful to Madam and my mentor. So, I mean, as long as you are there, my confidence is there. So, I will work for my students. So, whatever I have learned, I will give, and also I will bring you on this online platform so that I will be or I will continues to be your student. So, it's very, I always enjoy being a student than being a teacher. Right. So
true
thank you.
that one thing, is it not true that Marx gave us the dynamics of decision making?
I could not get your question. What is,
No, no, there is something behind the every law. That is what he said. So I'm saying the dynamics of decision making are the by the ruling class. Is it not the way in a very secular way the capitalists are giving the viewpoint like Herbert Simon and all? So I think Marx has hinted at that.
yeah, yes, of course. Marx says, but the decision making process is also at several levels. Na? For
Yes.
example, decision making process in the factory is different from decision making process in the state power, in in the social life of the civil society. So far as state is concerned, Marx says state operates like an executive agency of the ruling class. But
Yes.
that view is partly true. Therefore, Marx
Yes.
offers gives us a, a founding view of the decision making of the state. State decides things as if trying to sum up the views of ruling classes. Ruling classes may be divided. State tries to essentially unite them by giving them a cementing viewpoint. So decision-making power of ruling classes is equally invested in the state power. That
Yes.
through
Uh,
delegation. That I think that's Marx's contribution. But state has used many other instruments. Sometimes state acts contrary to the ruling class viewpoints. For example, bank nationalization of India, when the
Yes.
state government state act, it was contrary to the ruling class of the time. Everybody was against bank nationalization. Now, Modi government, which is critical of bank nationalization, they are using it effectively. So these are part of it. Right
Sir,
wing
for
force,
the
which is very critical of bank nationalization, is using it very effectively for their liberalization, privatization programs. So that
sir,
some of the formulations the state can also act on its own. Uh,
sir, for the first time, I think discussion is going on in the post vote of thanks session. So I think we have to stop here. I am stopping the recording, and the rest you
uh,
can discuss.
Okay, okay,
yeah,
okay.
you record, stop recording. There's no
No, stop recording and will we end the